So today we're going to learn object-oriented programming. Can you all see this pretty clearly? All right, awesome. So you don't have to like patronize me by giving me the thumbs up if I'm doing this. Just a simple nod works as well, because this sounds silly, right? The idea is that like this doesn't seem like a lot of effort, but when you're in the zone, like doing this 9 times over the course of like 10 minutes is like, all right, Evans, I get it. Just give me like a, or I'll figure it out, right? But just give me something. If I'm like, hey, how are we feeling? And it's just straight, it's hard for me. The feedback's very useful, especially when you're laughing at me. I mean, with me. So, all right, let's go check it out. So here are our objectives for today, right? We're going to try our best to define what an object is in programming. And I say our best because the concept is very abstract. And so hopefully, just through practice, it'll start to make more sense. But that's what we're going to try to do today, all right? So we'll explain the concept of like sending messages. This is like kind of important, but ultimately what we really want to do is we want to be able to create a class, instantiate new instances of a class, and then ultimately like define like why that's useful, and then what's the benefit for that. We'll explain the difference between what is like a class and an instance. We're going to be able to pass arguments to the initialize method ultimately, like spoiler alert, right? You've gotten there to the labs, yeah? Okay, cool. We'll create instance methods, and then we'll talk about something called self. And then we'll define these attribute readers and writers, and I think that some of you have probably gotten stuck with them on the labs. But don't worry, hopefully I'll clear everything up today. All right, cool? All right, so we'll start with the first one, right? Does anyone know what an object is in programming? Ooh, it's tough, right? Let's take a look. Ready? Object in programming. So this is how the journey starts, right? You're like, oh, I see a new term. I'm going to look it up. And then you get bombarded with obnoxious technical jargon. And then you're kind of like, okay, that made sense. And like, you know, like other hilarious jokes that you tell yourself, right? No? All right. So like, what is an object, right? Specifically in the realm of computer science. And that is like, it could be a variable, a data structure, a function, a method. As such, is a value in memory referenced by an identifier. Like I said, clear as mud, yeah? Who's feeling real good? Like, oh, you just defined object. Thanks, Evans. Gold star. Who's feeling good about this? Okay, yeah, that's right, right? Like gladiator style, kind of like, right? So, luckily for us, we're going to be doing something called object-oriented programming. And so in class-based object-oriented programming, and this is because we're going to be building a lot of classes, an object refers to a particular instance of a class. Now, we've seen a lot of this before, right? So if I'm just going to open up terminal, I'm going to go into my interactive Ruby in case you want to know what IRB stands for. Probably not. If I were to do something like this, and I hit enter, what have I just sort of made? An array, right? I can also do it traditionally in what is like known as like the computer science sort of way, and that is I can do array and I can make a brand new one, and that's going to give me essentially the same result. So I can instantiate a brand new instance of a Ruby class, of an array class. So the array actually comes from a class of array. And we've seen something like that in the way that, like, if I have this 1, 2, 3, what have we done with array so far in terms of manipulating the data?
Create the array and add 1, 2, and 3.
Yes, right. We just made what is known as an array literal. I'm literally making a brand new array without having to do something called array.new. We can also sort of iterate through the array. We've seen this before plenty of times with all the different powerful enumerable methods. We've seen the each, we've seen the map, we've seen the select, and we've even seen sort of like find. How are we feeling about the for? Or does anyone kind of want like the explanation again? Or are we good? We Gucci? Gucci fam? All right. Did you say Gucci, Gucci, Gucci gang? Sure. Secret safe with me. So the idea is like, where did this dot find come from? Like, all of a sudden just existed, right? Like I never defined a method. I never did this. I never was like, oh, I'm just going to do def find. I never did that. But we can, however, call like a dot each. Where have we defined dot each?
The object array.
Right, in the array class. So it looks like this class is sort of like this blueprint that anytime I want to make a brand new one, it has access to all of these built-in methods. So if I wanted to check it, I can always go array and say, what are my methods? And it will literally tell me all the methods that are available to the array. Powerful stuff.
So if you wanted to make a whole new one, like you have
Like a whole new one? Like a brand new array? Okay, just kidding.
Booleans, strings, Gucci's, like would you make Gucci? Like you see what I'm saying?
All I heard was Booleans, arrays, Gucci, you know what I'm saying? And while I would love to,
You said that it was an object. So are strings, Booleans, those are objects.
yes, strings, Booleans, maybe not Gucci, but it can be.
But it can be.
We have the power, right? Strings, arrays, hashes, all of those are objects. So if you ever hear, you might have heard this. Who's heard like everything in Ruby is an object? Okay, if you haven't, everything in Ruby is an object. Very good. And so the idea is that you're literally just creating a bunch of these classes, and then you're instantiating a new instance of that class. You're taking that blueprint, and you're sort of making one. All right, and this will make a little bit more sense. Before I kind of get to the next step, what I want to talk about is the fact that these classes, when you instantiate them, they can instantiate instances of other classes. Now, who here felt like that made sense? Okay, wow, smart. Run it back one more time. When you instantiate an object, right, that can also instantiate another object. So let's take a look, right? I've got boop, boop, boop. Sure, array.new, and I can tell it 3. And that's going to give me 3 items inside my array. Boop, boop, boop. I can give it other arguments and say, hey, I'm going to make 3 items, and for each one of them, it's going to be this string 1. I can also make a brand new string and say, let us yeet. Okay, this class is, you guys are the professional class. Sorry about that. I'll roll that back. I'll tell you the story of yeet later if you guys want to know, but this is later. We're in a professional setting. So I can make a brand new string by just doing string.new and passing in an argument, or I can just make the string right here and say we are profs. That's not actually professional. Right? And that is a string literal. Now, if you just combine those two, what is this really? This is just, oops, this is just string.new here. You know what I'm saying? And so when I made this brand new array, I'm like leaving it important, it's fine. When I'm making this brand new array, I can actually, when I instantiate an instance of array, this can instantiate instances of other objects. Does that make sense now?
Yes.
Cool. And so that's really what it's about when you ask questions, right? You hear a lot of jargon and you're like, that kind of made sense, but if you ask the question and you see the example, you get the analogy, you're like, great. Now it's clear to me, right? And so that's kind of like what I'm hoping from all of you to kind of ask those questions. Now, how are we feeling about like just objects in general, or if I say like array literal or string literal, at least that part? Better? Cool, all right. So let's kind of go back, right? So this object, specifically in object-oriented programming, is going to be an instance of one of these classes. So what that would mean is if I'm talking about the array class and I instantiate a new one, right, with array.new, this right here is considered an object. Objects can act on messages, and really what that means is if I have this array, I'm super lazy, boop, boop, I can do .each on it. I'm sending this array right here a message, and that message is this method of .each. That's just an abstract computer programming terminology, but really you're just calling the .each method on the object array, the instance of an array object. So objects just respond to messages, and how we do that here in programming is we're just going to call methods on it. That's really what it is. So if I say that an object can respond to a message, that should just mean that, oh great, I'm just going to call a method on it. That's kind of like the idea. Cool? Okay, cool. Bet. All right. Spicy. I'm definitely going to start moving the lectures. This is like the like I'm sleepy from lunch kind of thing. All right, cool. All right, I'll just put you all on my back and I'll carry you to the promised land. We'll get there. All right, so that's kind of like the idea of like the object can receive messages. And so this is going to make a lot more sense as we start to get into tomorrow, where I introduce you to like relationships and objects having relationships. But for right now, let's just kind of do our own thing. And that is, if I wanted to make a brand new dog, well, before I get to that, why we code and program? Yeah, I know, I jumped around, sorry. Why we code and program is because we want to model real life, right? We want to solve real world problems. It's great if it's all like, cool, you know how to code, I can make arrays, I can iterate through them, and you're like, awesome. That helps me none, right? We learn to code because we want to solve real world problems. And so one of the things that we want to do is really like, let's just say you want to make a pet store, right? Or you're like going into this cool startup and it's called Bark, or Bark, I mean, actually those are real companies, right? BarkBox? Okay, embarrassing. Let's just say you're just trying to make a startup and you want to help like this company adopt a bunch of dogs. So you'll have to like create rows of data to kind of represent all your dogs. So one of the things you can do is you can just do, okay, I can have dog 1, and that's going to equal this like object with a name, and that's going to be, what's this like dog's name? Rex? Okay, Rex. And how old is Rex? 3 must be a popular number. Ugh, my dog is like 14, so it's like, I know. Adorable though. I'm gonna cry so hard. Anyways, if I want to make another dog, right? You'll learn a lot more about me than coding, unfortunately. I'm just kidding. So if I want to make a new dog, I have to do this, right? Dog 2, and then what do you want to name this? There's a student in Mod 3 that has a dog named Ruby. So I made a bad joke. I'm like, what's your other dog's name? JavaScript? Like, oh. She thought it was hilarious. Anyways, great. Yeah, what kind of dog name do we have here? Y'all got tired after the first one? Lisa? Okay, sure. I was hoping for like Fido or Spot, but Lisa's cool. How old is Lisa? Okay, all right, let me guess. The next dog's 9? Now I have dog 1 and dog 2, right? If I wanted to make another one from scratch, I have to, oh, this is so boring. So slow, right? And typically is prone to errors because I have to kind of type this all out. Now, it would be great if I can take this, create a prototype, and realize that all dogs have at least a name, an age, and go to heaven, right?
I knew you were going.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. I'm both predictable and boring. Now I know. So I can prototype them, right? And that's when it makes sense to create this sort of class. And so let's actually do that. I don't need to delete that, whatever. So you've done some of the labs. How can I create this sort of like dog prototype, this dog class? What do I need to do? Right. I start with the word class, right? Very classy. Uppercase dog, right? What happens if I wanted a class for like dog friend? Is it like this? Can I rock it like that? Yeah, so an important programming concept is different languages and different syntax marks different things. So this right here, if you have this sort of underscore, what is this called? Well, yeah, underscore is called underscore. Yeah, very good. Why is it called snake case? Right. It's because for whatever reason, some genius was like, this looks like a snake. But does it though? Does it? Durs? So like, you have like a capital letter, and then you have an underscore, and then you have more words, and you have an underscore. Where have we seen this snake case before? Who said JavaScript?
Variable names.
Variable names, for sure, and also method names. So in Ruby, we use the snake case. Here, if I wanted in my class syntax, like a dog friend who is cool, I would type it in something like this, without the underscore, and very specifically without the spaces. So here, the syntax highlighting doesn't bug out, but as you start to add more, the highlighting bugs out because it doesn't really know how to process this. You don't add spaces because the way the Ruby interpreter reads, it should read it as like one keyword. And so this right here is just, right? This right here is known as camel casing because every single time you want a new word inside this one keyword, it looks like a hump of a camel. It does look like a hump of a camel, but that's the way you could kind of think of it, right? So like dog starts as like a hump, and then it goes down, and then friend, and then I've never seen a camel with 3 humps, but you know, it just keeps going. And so that's like the idea, right? So how are we feeling about snake case and then the camel casing? All right, in Ruby, did you Wakanda Forever me? Nice, oh boy, that's the one. In Ruby, classes are under, yes, classes are gonna be under that camel casing, and then basically for variables and methods, we're gonna be using snake casing. So in the same way that if I do, I end, if I end, and when I do class, I usually end, and then just like a little pro tip that I've picked up from like years of programming, I always add like a little bit of a comment. So this is where the dog class ends. All right, so I can put like end dog. And the reason I want to do that, okay. Yeah, I don't want to end dog, right? Oh my God, my dog's 14, bringing up some tough memories. I want to end the dog class. Let's be more specific, right? Class. And the reason I want to do that is because, as you can imagine, as you start to build a lot more of your code, it's going to start going here. And then you're going to like start chaining a bunch of stuff. You're going to have ifs, right? And they're going to end, but then you'll have a bunch of elses. But then you'll have like a do somewhere. And then you won't realize that this end is not actually the end for your method. And then you'll run into some errors. So it's good to just kind of like mark notes like this. Cool? All right, it's like a little pro tip. All right, so the first thing is when we make arrays or strings and we do like array.new or even like hash.new, this new means that you're instantiating a brand new instance of this class. So for dog, we want to instantiate a brand new instance of this class. How do we do that?
Outside the method.
Initial.
Yes and yes, right? It would be outside the method, technically correct, dog.new. All right, but what I was looking for specifically was the initialize method. So both, wow, everyone's a winner. 10 points to Gryffindor. So I know folks love shortcuts. And what you'll start to see is, like even in interviews, you'll know immediately if somebody is sort of like a junior, a mid, or like a senior developer based on how they're using their IDE and how they're typing. And so you'll start to see me use like a lot of shortcuts. But really it's kind of like, you guys seen MasterChef? You guys know the show? Okay, like 5-second summary is Gordon Ramsay will judge like 20 amateur chefs and then pick one who's the best. Cool? That's pretty good. And so they interviewed him one time to be like, hey, Gordon, like, do you know who's going to win in the beginning? And he's like, yeah, I could tell immediately. I'm like, oh, damn, that's ice cold. And they're like, how? They're like, it's their knife skills. And what you'll see is people who develop often, I forgot who asked me, but someone's like, can you teach me a shortcut? Because I'm feeling real lazy. Yes, right? We develop because we want to abstract things that we do over and over and over so that we don't have to do them anymore. Because the computer doesn't mind, right? Thank you. Very good. And the idea is that if you can save yourself time, use the shortcut. So if I want to define a new method called initialize, it's so common in the class that if you do, boop, you'll be good to go. Did anyone see that? All right. It's just DFI, meaning define a method initialize, and you press tab, it'll build it for you. Cool? Oh, I see that. Oh, wow, this is where the notes are? Not like what's an object in programming. It's like, all right, cool, define initialize. I'm going to drop a bunch of these. The next thing is I want to talk about indent.
Yeah, is that true in other
It should be universal, the snippet.
So you can put it in if it's not in your snippet.
If this doesn't exist, you can add a custom snippet, correct. Yep. I'm afraid of leading you down this rabbit hole because I did that with my last class and everything became a snippet. And I was like, this is powerful. All right, so check it out. Next thing I want to talk about is code organization, and the cleanliness and readability of your code is more important than the number of lines of code. I've tried to do my due diligence, and I don't hide around me, but sometimes I'll eavesdrop in your conversation just to kind of get a feel of the questions that you're asking and how you're thinking about approaching code. And one of the common trends I see is, okay, this method's too long, which is a good, insightful thought, but do not measure the quality of your code based on the number of lines of code. That is a very, very old school measurement that means nothing. The more important thing is going to be the speed, and we can talk a lot more about this when we get to Mod 3 in terms of speed and time complexity. We'll talk a little bit about Big O, but more about the readability of your code. And it's because developers' time is very expensive, which sounds really bad, but as a developer, it's very good, right? So on your end, right, the idea is that, let's just say you make $100,000. Wow, can't wait. The idea is that at some point, and this is my real advice, and I wish I could turn this recording off, but I can't. Your first job will be about the experience, right? Pick a really good company, pick a really good boss, pick someone that will mentor you, and then really level up your skills. 1 second. Honestly, after 1 year, if they don't promote you or they don't move you up, you can and likely should leave, unless you absolutely love your company and it's a scrappy startup and your best friend's the co-founder. Don't stab him in the back. But the idea is if you're working for a company, your second job, after a year, you should be asking for that 6-figure. Seriously, it happens that fast. It happens so often, especially with the coaches, which is great for you guys. I say all that to say that if your code's not readable and it takes me a long time to understand what you're trying to do, and I'm supposed to add on to your code base and add on to a feature, that costs real money, right? At $100,000 a year, you're talking about maybe 70 or 80 cents a minute. You're close to that $1 a minute mark. If it takes me 2, 3, 4 extra minutes to read your code, you're costing the company real money at that point, genuinely. And so I'm gonna sprinkle in some pro tips and philosophy, but that's the idea. You want your code to be really readable, and so that's why when you're iterating through a hash and I see immediately your hash.each and it's KV, and I'm okay. Name those variables, right? It's gonna be so much more helpful in terms of the readability, but ultimately when your code is judged, right? When your code is evaluated in reviews, even for interviews, right? The readability is going to be so important. Because if I can immediately understand what you're writing, then I can contribute, I can add. And that's going to be your big value add. And that's why, that's the way I like to teach. You had a question or comment first, and then I'll get to you.
Have you known any friends or anything that actually created their own company after leaving you?
Funny you should say that. I just got a text from a former student who started her second company. Yeah.
Wait, did the first one work or did it crash and burn?
No, the first one's still up. But I guess all of her holdings were in the US, but she wanted to expand internationally. So she actually hired a former grad to start in Lebanon and stuff. So
How much can you just kind of rely on clearly naming variables and stuff versus the line between over commenting and putting comments?
that's a very good question. The question is how good can your code be in terms of readability and how much comments you should add? You should add a good amount of comments. Your code readability, this is the rule of thumb. Your code readability should be the first time I read through your code, I should know exactly what it's doing. If I cannot determine that based on the way you've named the methods or the variables, that's when you add additional comments. Typically, comments are why you're doing something, and then the code is how you're doing it. Cool? Awesome. All right. So what I want to talk about readability is it becomes really hard if you don't learn how to indent your code. After a while, you get really lazy, and I shouldn't be saying this, but I only have you guys for a week, so I want to like drop as much knowledge as possible. There's something called Prettier. Please do not download this right now. Yes, it's Prettier. And what it will do is it will auto indent, and it will do its best guess, and it is like 99% accurate to like indent your code. What you'll start to see is, do you remember Hashkeball and how nested it was?
Yeah.
So like, let's take a look at that Reddit .json again. Cool. So how readable would you say this data is? And you're kind of like, oh, I don't know what you mean. I mean this. Can you read this or can you read this? Yeah, you probably can't, right? Let's add a little bit of indentation. Let's add a little bit of color. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, bless up. Thank you. This is what Prettier will do for you in case yours looks like this, you know? But that's the idea. And so what I want to harp on and focus on is like the absolute basics and fundamentals. And that is anytime you're inside the scope of something else, you want to indent. So this define initialize is inside the class, and I'm going to indent it. Cool? If you don't indent, then like all your code winds up looking like this, and it becomes very hard to see where your if ends are, your do ends, or like where the scope of something exists. Cool? All right. Sorry, it's like you're not going to get a lot of that from like readmes in the lab. So if I'm talking a little bit, I want you guys to be good developers, you know? All right, great. So we're initializing the dog. All right, what kind of attributes does the dog have? Named, right? So you see how this argument is, and then it highlights the other ones. If you want to select them, you hold Command, you press D, and you're like, boop, boop, and then you can select them. And so now I can do name. Ooh, spicy. Yeah, art. I knew it. It's the shortcuts that all the notes come out. If you highlight something and there's an exact match somewhere else in your code, you hit Command D and it'll select it. If you continue to hit Command D, it'll select more and more and more and more.
Does it have to be highlighted, or just your cursor kind of like hover it?
Like this? That won't work. You have to highlight it. Yeah. And then it'll match all like the matching ones, right?
So, quick question. I mean, suppose you're working on a Windows machine as well.
Yeah. I think it's Control D.
It's Control D in there.
It should be. Or like the Windows button, which is like a new thing. I don't know, PC Master Race. Anyway, so I play a lot of video games. So initialize, right? We have name. What other attributes of dog are important? Age, cool.
Sex.
Oh, okay. Sex or gender? What do we? Sex. I guess sex. Let's go sex. Gender? I don't really know, but what I don't want to do is offend anyone. I feel like in today's climate, it's important that we treat people like with respect. I know it's a dog, but you know you got to do the right thing. So
Just go breed. Make it easy.
breed, okay. Breed seems to be less. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. All right. Okay, great. Boop, boop, boop. All right, I'm gonna explain some of what's happening here. Right. Boop. Cool. And then we can obviously have like a heaven boolean, and that's just gonna default to true, obviously. So now we're modeling real life. There we go. So here we go. What is happening on lines 3, 4, and 5, and why is there this like @ sign that prepends like name, age, and breed? What is that? How would someone describe that? Okay. All right, so we have like instance variable, right? What does that really sort of like mean?
It's a variable that is specific to an instance of the object types.
Exactly, right? The variable is specific to that instance. So if I were to do dog.new and I were to say this name is, what is the dog's name? Gucci? Gucci. What a delightful dog. How old is Gucci?
7.
9. And then what is Gucci's breed? Choco Lab? That's a breed? I don't know. I don't actually know, but I will take your word for it. Powerful. Okay. Should we just Google it real quick? I'm just kidding. All right.
Yeah,
So, all right. So we wrote a lot of code, and what I want to talk about is the fact that I would love to see photos, but let's do that after lecture. I would want to talk about the fact that when you write a lot of code, you have to test constantly. If you add one thing, you have to test. You add one thing, you have to test. And so, of course, we got to bring in our good friend, old pry. And now we have to test, right? So I'm going to add this binding.pry. How can I have access to this dog that was created right here on line 12?
Put a variable.
Right. On line 12, the Ruby interpreter will run. It will execute. It will create that dog instance. It exists in memory, but I have no reference to it. So in order to create the reference, now I'm just going to go, oh, boop, oh, doggy1, doggo, right? And now when I hit the pry, I should have access to this variable doggo, which is actually an instance of dog because dog is its own class, yeah? Starting to make sense? All right?
So,
All right.
quick question.
Send it.
When you do instantiate like a new object, whatever,
Mhm.
it'll return like object ID, like the memory reference. Is
Mhm.
there any way to access it through that?
No, unfortunately. Plus, it's going to be wild. Let's take a look at it. So how can I actually hit this binding?
Put something after.
Do I have to put something after? Sometimes pry is a punk and it wants something at the end, yeah. Because remember, pry will pause the execution of your code. If pry sees, this is like a weird bug with pry. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If it sees that it's the last line, it's like, oh, why am I even pausing? There's nothing left here. So sometimes pry wants like anything, like whatever, after the code, just so it knows that like it's not the last thing and that pausing actually has some sort of value. So I just like 0 because it's cool and it's binary. Okay, man, I thought I was with a bunch of nerds. All right, so how can I actually test this code? I got to run the file, right? So this file is called dog. So I'm simply gonna exit out of here. If I take a look, I'm in the folder. I see dog here. I can do Ruby, and I can use my powerful autofill. I can drop the letter D. Oh man, and then I can press tab, and that should autofill. Thank you for those that don't want to blow up my spot. And now I'm pausing the binding on line 14. And so what I want to test is, one, like, did all of this work? So I'm just going to look at doggo. Boop, 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 boop. Oops, too many. And there it is. What you were referencing is sort of like this object ID. There's no real way to kind of like get this, right? So what we could see here is we see age, breed, and name, right, as the attributes of this dog instance. And so that's great. So let me take a look at this doggo, right? How would I get this doggo's age? Dot age? Cool. Dot age equals, no. Heard a lot of weird things.
Yeah, you gotta do accessors.
So, no method error, right? So please do not be afraid of errors. They're your friend. There's no method error. Undefined method age. So how can we fix that? If there's no method age, we should probably just make a method age, right? Powerful. So let me do that. Should I do that outside the dog class or inside the dog class? All right. So inside the scope of dog, again, I'm going to indent. So I'm going to make this method, and it's just going to be called age. And all I wanted to do is return that instance variable of age. And so now that that's done, let's actually go back. Remember, you write one line of code. Well, not one line, but you do one thing, you test. You do one thing, and you test. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to write back into it. I'm going to go doggo, and I'm going to check that age. Wow. Powerful. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be here all week. So what about name? If I do doggo.name, I try to access the name, what happens? Right, it doesn't have it. So naturally then, if you want, you can kind of copy and paste, or you can do one of these, bloop. And so, bloop, bloop. Right? And so like you can see like you could develop like quickly if you know a lot of shortcuts, and that's just gonna come with experience. Nobody? All right. Bloop, bloop, bloop.
How
All
do
right.
you do that? Is that what you?
Unless you know, right? If you want to copy code, and this is extremely common, right? You want to like duplicate your code. So Command D will kind of select the next thing that matches. Command Shift D will literally copy and paste the line of code immediately. And so this is going to be another classic. Command Shift D. I will wait. That's actually an important one, yeah. Noise. Gives me a chance to take a sip of my stimulant train. All right.
DFI works for initialize, and also does DFN work for that?
No, you just got to drop def and then press tab. See, these are all the snippets. So with def tab, it makes a method for me. And then it adds this powerful comment that said, your code goes here. All right, cool. So, great. So I have like name and age, and I can go test that. Boop, boop, boop. Oops, just kidding. I'll run the file again, doggo.name. So right now, I myself am kind of going through and testing each thing. If you want that to test without pry, you can easily just go, okay, what I want to know is whether or not doggo.breed works. So doggo.breed, and we can see whether or not that works here. What should happen here? It's just going to try running the method. There's no real feedback loop or system for you to recognize whether or not it worked, because dog.breed, you'll see, is going to run that error because we don't have sort of that method built for it. But what happens if I simply run dog.age? What will happen when I run the file? Okay, I'm sorry. Doggo, embarrassing. Cool. Nothing. So in order to get any sort of feedback, right, what I was talking about was besides systematically and intentionally placing the pry and testing your variables, you'll have to do a lot of puts commands. And so that's just the other way of doing it. What your flavor and preference are, and a combination of both are going to be your friend. And so I can easily just now, if I do that, what you'll see is 9 come out and then sort of like the error. So I know that 9 worked. I know that that age came out. And so puts is kind of like another way to kind of debug. So let's kind of, boop, boop, boop. Let's get out of here. Now, obviously I can do like def breed and then do at breed. Who likes being upset? You like being upset? Good, very good. So now there are shortcuts because this pattern and this paradigm is so important and so frequent that when I initialize with some of these instance variables, the idea is that like I'm always going to want typically access to them. So there's something called a macro. And a macro is just like a shortcut or shorthand version of writing something. So if I need to access something, I need to read information about this class dog for this age, I can simply say this attribute, reader for age, is going to be a one-for-one exact same thing, right? This line right here is literally going to build this for me. So if I comment this out and I save and I see that blue dot is gone, then theoretically, if I run the code, I should have doggo.age and it should work just fine. Cool? You said sick or so?
Is it just like, because I guess you could just leave it at like, because that's how Ruby syntax works, but is there a reason like that in that case we're using a symbol with age as opposed to like, is that just, is it a symbol there, I guess? Or is that
This is considered a symbol. The adder reader will accept the attributes as symbols. Yep. So if I wanted the age, name, and breed, I can simply give it age, name, and breed.
But you do need to have somewhere else specifically a class variable or an instance variable with the at sign of the exact thing. Like it's gonna know.
Yeah, it's going to match it here as attribute, correct. So I don't need this as well. Bloop, gone. All right, let me do this. Let me just bring this down here. So I've created the readers for age, name, and breed by just using this one macro. You're going to hear a term called syntactical sugar, and that just means that instead of writing this sort of like longhand version, this like syntax, I can sprinkle a little bit of this sugar, make it sweet and easy to kind of read. So now I have added readers for age, name, and breed, and that's kind of the idea. So syntactical sugar is just a fancy way of saying, here's a shortcut to do it. All right? So boop, boop, boop. All right. Let's test. So this doggo, bloop, bloop, bloop. This doggo will have access to age, name, and breed. All thanks to this powerful sort of adder reader. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes, unfortunately, things happen and your dog has to go up for adoption, and this new owner is like, I don't know about that name Gucci. Just not feeling it. How can we change the name now? What would make sense to you in terms of like, if I'm in this code and I'm looking at the doggo.name, right? How do we change anything? Like if I had a variable called ya boy and it equaled to Wangtron. All of a sudden, your boy is no longer Wangtron, but the spiciest meme lord. Cool. What is this right here? Yes. Wow, this first, your class is powerful. Usually I hear equal, I'm like, technically true, but we're looking for assignment, right? This is the assignment operator. So if I wanted to reassign sort of doggo.name, what would that look like? And then now I'm going to reassign it to be, what do you guys want to name this dog? Jank. Rutrow. So it looks like there's undefined method name equal. Okay, sure. I can fix that. Yo, say less, fam. You want a method called name equal? Got you. All right. Now, name equal obviously takes some sort of argument. That's going to be the new name. So if name equal, it's going to take in like some new name, all right? And now at name is going to be some new name, right? So let's test. One thing, one test, full minds, clear eyes. Well, can't lose. I don't know. Okay. Pop culture much? Or all right. Let's take a look, right? So doggo.name, and then now apparently this new owner is a bourgeoisie and wanted to name their dog Janky. Oh my god, oh, look at the work. Whoa, it's crazy. So let's take a look at doggo.name. It has now been officially and successfully reassigned and renamed. Very good, yeah? And so this also happens to be an extremely popular thing where you want to take that attribute and you want to write to that attribute. I think it's writer. Yeah? Yes, no? Okay. And I want to do the name. Now, if I see that I can read and write, I have full access to this attribute. Before I move on, any questions on adder writer and how it literally builds this for you? Let's reveal our votes here.
Good.
Wow. All right, great. So,
Does it stack the same way as the?
absolutely. Bam. So here's the thing though, like, we could probably change the age, but can you ever change the breed of a dog? Right? Maybe in our app, right? But in real life, like, oh. And so again, we code to model real life. So I probably want to leave that one out. If I notice that name and age are both reader-writer, I can do something called Dur Accessor. And that gives me both the reader and the writer. Wow. Powerful. I'm just going to get rid of this. Cool. How are we feeling so far about readers, writers, and accessors? Yeah?
Do you have to, like, you don't necessarily have to put them in the initialize method, right? right? If you have like attribute accessor for them.
You remember
You should
what this builds for you. It only builds this method. That's all it does. The accessor will build the writer, the getter, and the setter. These are what they're called. They're called get methods and set methods.
So as long as you initialize it somewhere, it doesn't have to be an initializer, right?
Technically speaking, you don't even have to have it in the initialize.
Right. That's what I was asking.
But for the most part, it should go in the initialize. Yeah. All right. So that's basically like about it, right? Now, the dog has access to these instance methods. Like an instance of a dog has access to an instance. That should make sense. So let's talk about this idea that like I'm running this sort of kennel. And now I have not 1, 2, 3. All right, okay. Little Sesame, I babysat recently and I watched Sesame Street. Okay, I know, powerful. All right, so I have like these 3 dogs now, right? Let's name them. You got Gucci, you have Schmoochie. All right, I can see where this class is going. Okay, great. And then obviously another popular brand, right? Yep.
It's okay. Just a C.
Obviously tells you a lot about how fashionable I am. I'm a fashionista. No, not at all. This I got from a trip, and this T-shirt was free. So, all right, great. How old is Chanel? 12. Okay. All right. What kind of breed is Chanel here?
Chihuahua.
I'll have an
Oh, wow, really? Okay. We got what are they actually called? Like,
Chihuahua. Yorkie.
yeah, but they're like yippy dogs, right? Whatever. Wow. I always am. I feel like I'm getting judged here. How do you spell this? Is that?
I think the H is up and down. I don't know.
Yeah.
Why don't we
It
pick
doesn't
easier
matter.
ones?
Yeah. Why don't we pick easier ones? Who said that? That was smart. A Yorkie. I know how to spell that because I live here. Okay, right. Just kidding. You guys are mean. All right. Yorkie and Husky. Husky? Just kidding. Ha 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 ha. Fooled you. All right. So we got a beautiful chocolate lab, a yippy dog, and a woofer, right? And so of these 3 dogs. Now, let's take a look, right? If I run my code again, right? So notice this flow that I'm doing. I'm always like saving and I'm going back in. I'm saving, I'm going back in. Where's the RSpec for my file or my code really? That's right. It looks exactly like that. It's like that Zac Efron meme. You're like it's nowhere, right? But how am I testing my code and how do I know if it works? I'm systematically dropping those put statements or I'm using the pry. That's how I know if my code works. And so when I talk about certain deliverables, then ultimately I'm like, great, your code should be able to do X, Y, Z. So if you don't have a spec file, you shouldn't be like, oh snap, like what do I do? It's more like you write the code, you think through the logic, and then you test it line for line with pry or your put statement. Is it returning what I think it's returning? Yeah? Okay. So let's run that code. Great. I've got doggo 1, doggo 2, and tree. Now, man, if I'm running a kennel, what makes sense for me to be able to do, theoretically? All right. Does it make sense if I can look at each individual dog?
Not if that's all you
Right. Not if it's all I can do. What makes sense? Like if I'm like running a kennel and someone comes in and goes, I'm going to adopt everything. How many dogs do you have? And I'm like, I don't know. I gotta go through dog 1. I gotta go through dog 2. I don't even know if there's a dog 4. I have to just guess. Nope. I only got 3 dogs. I'm sorry. Like, that's a problem, right? There should be some sort of way to have access to
the count, the number of dogs.
all the dogs, right? That's where I'm going with this. Very good. I need to have access to all the dogs. Now, when you're thinking through programming, the idea is like, all right, if I have a name, and if I have an age, and I have a breed, those are respective to each individual dog, right? Like, I, as dog 1, should know what breed I am and how old I am. I, as dog 1, theoretically should not know or don't need access to or look at the attributes of dog 2. I'm dog 1, I'm a selfish dog, and it's all about me. That's all it is, right? And so, unfortunately, right, at some point, someone else will have to have access to all these dogs. So in terms of scope, right, we've called these instance variables, and it makes sense because when I created a brand new instance, doggo1, which is an instance of the dog class, has access to the instance methods and instance variables. This right here is what is known as like an instance method. I've defined it within the class, and it pertains to each individual instance. So far, so good? Okay. And so if I actually wanted this dog to bark, all right, I just go bork, and all it's going to do is puts bork, 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 right? And so every dog can now call this method. This right here is like an instance method. So you have instance variables, instance methods, and instances. It's all lined up. So if I do dog.bork, what should I see if I run the code? Very good. I made a bet that I get this class to bark, and I won. I'm just kidding, I didn't do that. But yeah, you'll see this bork, bork, bork kind of come out, right? And every doggo has access to it. Bork, bork, bork. Cool? Let's just go hard. Boom. All the dogs have access to it. And so this bork is being invoked and called on what? How would you describe this? Instantiation, right? Right. It's an instance of the dog object, right? So doggo2 is an instance, and it's calling this instance method. So far, so good. Now, would the responsibility and the scope of all the dogs fall under the responsibility of each individual instance? If I'm dog 2, should I know about all the dogs? Probably not, right? Because it's a tough world out there. It's all about me, myself, and I. Now, what would make sense in terms of sort of like where would I want to put the responsibility of all the dogs? Right? Like the idea is that this dog class, this blueprint, this overarching megalord should know about all the dogs. If I'm the dog class, there should be some way that I could check the dog class and be like, hey, how many instances do you just have running around? Right? And so, say again? Yeah, who let the dogs out? It should fall under the responsibility of the dog class. Now, what we've seen so far is this dog.new, right? This capital DOG and this capital DOG is referencing the class. So when I do dog.new, this is like a very weird sort of exception, but dog.new calls this initialize method. If I wanted a class method, what it kind of looks like is this capital D, OG, dot some class method, right? I'm calling it on the dog class. That's kind of what it looks like. So far, so good. Now, what would make sense for naming a method for like all the dogs? I want to see all the dogs. What should I call that method? Dog dot what? Like, sure, like all dogs. You can get even lazier and just, if I saw something like dog.all, I would understand like, hey, it's going to give me all the dogs, you know what I mean? With that readability. Wow. So, I get now why they want to record me. So I have like dog.all, right? So how can I actually create this? So that's sort of like what the next step is, what the next big problem is. The idea is that, do you guys want this?
No.
Wow, that was fast. All right. That was very fast. The idea is that when you're in the scope here, we're in the scope of the dog class. So far, so good. Once we are inside the instance method, we're in the scope of the instance method, right? If I was inside of sort of like an if statement, then the scope on lines 18 and 19 is the if statement. That's what I sort of have access to at that current time, right? So if that's the case, if between lines 3 and 20, on lines 3 and 20, I'm in the scope of the dog class. I'm referencing the dog class. So if I needed to write some sort of method, I need to do something like dog.all. That's basically what I'm trying to build. So far, so good. Like, this shouldn't be like too crazy, right? Yeah? What really kind of is this? What data structure makes the most sense to kind of contain and hold all the dogs? Not a global variable, but yeah, like I would put like an array right here. Cool. So let's actually find out what's happening. If I were to go back to my terminal, remember, one thing at a time, easy breezy. Boop. Interesting. Initialize jacked up. Line 9, given 0, expected 3 or 4. Okay. Boop. I'm just gonna get rid of all this. Sorry. Embarrassing. Cool. All right. So if I were to call dog.all, what should I kind of get back? We get this empty array back, right? The idea is that what I'm really trying to do is inside here, this dog.all, somehow I need to push in like the sort of like instance of dog, right? That's like the idea, like dog.all, every time this dog is created, I need to take that instance and be like, great, I'm just gonna put you in this collection so that I can reference you later. So far, so good? This becomes an interesting problem. Like, let's think. When the dog's first created, where can I sort of like reference the dog? When is the dog first created in all of this code? In the initialize, right? That's when the dog's first literally initialize, is like created right there. So there must be some sort of like array somewhere here where I'm shoving in, right, sort of like that brand new instance. Interesting. Okay. So it doesn't like that because you can see the syntax highlighting, right? So I'm going to introduce some new concepts to you, right? This single at referenced the instance, but now we have some sort of dark voodoo magic here. Boop, boop. Oh, just kidding. If I have 2 of these at signs, this is going to be known as like a class variable. So I want to call this like all the doggies or doggos. And what should all the doggos be as like a data structure we've talked about? All right, it should be an array. It doesn't make sense to make all the doggos like a string. That'd be crazy. It's wild. So now what I want to do is take this instance variable and inside the initialize, when it's first created, I have to shove in this brand new instance of dog. So far, so good. Here's the thing. How can I reference this brand new instance of dog while it's being sort of created? That's kind of like a brain buster, yeah? Unless you've already solved it, in which case I feel stupid. Someone want to help me out? Right, I would call self, right? So, all right, smart people. What is self? Taking over? I don't know, I thought you said the right answer. I was just... Getter, setter. No, not exactly, right? The idea of self is very much like English, right? What I like to talk about when I teach is that words mean things, and that's very important. So when you talk about self, what are you always sort of like referencing when you're like, oh, self? I mean, you don't really say that. You're never like, yo, dog, self. Like, you never really talk like that. But when you say self, or you think about self, what is that referencing? Right, it's referencing, it's not very good English, but like it's referencing like me, like myself. So if I'm sort of being created at the time, self will be a reference to that instance that's being created. How can we test this? We could print it, right? And so here I just, let's put self, right? You can print it. But remember, you could pause the execution of your code. When I run dog.new, what method does it call? Initialize. If I put a binding right here, binding.prove, right? If I pause it right here and I call self, it will actually tell me what it is. Now, this is a very interesting thing, right? Are you the exact same person when you hang out with different group of friends? Oh, wow. Thank you for your candor. Usually people are like, oh, of course I am. I'm like, okay. Right? Yeah, you yourself sort of are like a chameleon in the way that you kind of change and adapt who you are based on where you are. Right? Like if you're hanging out with your homies on a Friday and you've had a couple of Monster energy drinks or Five Locos, whatever, right? Yeah, yourself is like a little different, right? So the idea is that where you are matters in terms of like yourself. And that will happen the same with code. So let's think about this. Dog.all no longer should be sort of this right here. If I have the array and it's empty in my dog class, every single time I run initialize, I set the name, I set the age, I set the breed, and then I push the brand new instance into an array. If I run dog.new 3 times, how many dogs should be in this all the dogs array? Surprise, right? It should be 3. Let's test. Boop. Okay, just kidding. I can't really test right now. Why? Well, yes, there's nothing inside dog.all, but more specifically, right, all the doggos is a class method. In the same way that @name is an instance method, I need to be able to retrieve @name. So in order to get access to @name, I had to build that getter, right? Def name, @name, end. I had to build this for the instance method. If this is a class method, I must build the getter for the class method. Now in dog.all, really what do I want to return? All right, all the doggos. Bloop. So I don't make a typo. I'm just going to copy that like a G. What's up?
Is there a way to put that in the accessory?
Unfortunately, no. It's not. Wow, you got upset about that one. It's not that bad. Don't worry. You'll learn about something called the eigen class as you get to more advanced Ruby. EIGEN. That's a great blog post. And so you can check that out. All right, so let's check it out. So I'm going to exit out of here. And now when I run ruby.dog and I'm in the pry, what does dog.all return? It returns this sort of class variable, but now it should have dog.new, which ran initialize 3 times, which pushed self into that array 3 times. So if I'm returning this array, we're saying it should have 3 things in it. Wow. That's powerful. All right. 3 people were impressed. Very good. Everyone else, good job on the labs, you know? All right, so dog.all returns an array. You can always check, like, hey, what did that give me? Ooh, wow. That's really cool because guess what I can do now, knowing that it's an array? Ooh. Oh, wow, that was embarrassing. Okay, wow. See what happens when you try to be slick? No bueno. Right? You can like use all of the array methods on it. And so now I want to kind of like expand your mind. The idea that we're going to get into tomorrow is that objects can have relationships with each other, but you should always be considering the data type that you're working with. Think about it. I have all these dogs, right? All the dogs is technically a collection of dog objects. There is a huge difference between, obviously these typos, between dog.all, which is an array of 3 dog objects, versus an array of Gucci. Man, I can't believe I'm running this channel. And old Rockaware. Cool. There's a huge difference between these 2 arrays, right? The idea is that objects have so much power because you can send them those messages. You can call and invoke like methods on them. Meaning, if I do dog.all and I grab the first one, I return what type of object? A dog object, right? Which means that dog.all, the first one has a name. And dog.all, the first one can bork. Versus this array here, right? And I'm just going to call this phony dogs. So if I do phony dogs and I grab the first item, what do I get back? A string. Can this first dog bork? No, it's going to be like you're out of control. That you can't call .bork's undefined method on a string, which makes sense. And so the power of this object-oriented programming is that if I deal with only objects, I can send those objects special methods that I built, rather than always deal with strings, in which case I don't have any of the extra custom cool sexy stuff that I want. So far so good? All right, cool. We're going to get more into that tomorrow, but there's this idea of like self. How are we feeling about self? Okay. So remember, self changes, right? So inside this instance method, in the scope of bork, if I were to say, boop, 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 which means nothing, by the way. If I were to drop a binding pry here, what would self refer to? The dog class or the instance of the dog? Who says the dog class? Instance of the dog. Okay, who thinks I'm trying to trick you? You guys don't like that very much. There's an old instructor named Mike Chang who used to say that, and the class loved it. You can see that doesn't work here, so I'm just going to stop doing that. So the idea is that if I were to put self here, this is going to reference the instance of the dog, right? And here's how you can kind of think about it. When I do dog.all, inside dog.all, what is self? Is it the instance or is it the class dog? Oh, wow. Powerful. All right, cool. I know you guys are watching me type, that's why. When I make a bunch of mistakes, I try to like bury them. All right, so dog.all is a class method. So the scope of this is going to be the class. So when I call self, I see that it should be the class dog. Inside the instance method, you'll see self becomes the instance. And here's why this makes sense. When I try doing dog.all, right, let's take a look at this. What is .all being called on? The dog class, right? Versus doggo1.bork. I'm sending an instance, this message of .bork, right? .bork is being called on what? Doggo1, which is an instance. So general rule of thumb is kind of like self will take on like that scope. Wherever it is kind of what it's supposed to be. So self is different here, self is different here, and self is different here. So when I do doggo1.bork, What is self in doggo1.bork? It's doggo1. However, if I were to do doggo2.bork, what is sort of self now? Doggo2. And so self is sort of like really adaptable. It's kind of like a hard, abstract concept to get, but you must have gone through all the labs, which is great. So you're like ahead.
You make all the dogs bark?
You can. You can make all the dogs bark.
So all that bark.
Is it all.bork?
Well,
Let's think through that, right?
all doggos that, oh yeah.
Doggo each work. Iterate through the work.
Yeah, like the idea is like if I want all the dogs to bark, first thing I need is access to all the dogs. And then go through each one, iterate, and then probably call .bork on each of them. And that's kind of the idea. All right? And then the hardest part is really kind of like naming them. So right now, this is the instance method. How can I possibly make this a class method? Or should it be a class method? If I want all the dogs to bark, should that be the responsibility of the individual instance? Or should that be the responsibility of sort of like the dog class? Who says the instance? Class. Okay, I don't know. And that's okay. The idea is that like, if you think through, right? If all the dogs are barking, why should that responsibility fall on one dog? Unless it's like the alpha, right? But the idea is that like that sort of responsibility, that was very stupid of me. That sort of responsibility falls on the class and not necessarily one dog, right? So I would probably put that on the class, right? Dog dot all the barking. And then I would do this. You know how to do this, right? Breaking those big problems into small problems that you know how to solve. So we're not going to get into this, but what I do want to talk about before I put you on break is the fact that we talked about scope. Oh, wow. We talked about scope. And inside the class of dog, not inside anything else, not inside a method, just inside the dog class, what is self sort of here? It should reference the dog, right? Yes? No? All right. So then instead of dog.all, smart, and then instead of dog.all the barking, cool. How are we feeling about that jump from dog.all to self.all? All right, so we covered a lot. I do want to give you a short break before we kind of like jump into another example that we could fly through very quickly. But how are we feeling about like kind of like objects, right? The instantiation of an instance of a class. Yes, no? All right. Sending messages, you're basically just calling methods, right? You can create a class, literally class, and then whatever the name is. We talked about the naming convention, that being camel case, and then variables and methods being snake case. The difference between a class and an instance, right? So class, right? Sorry, yeah, like class methods, class variables, right? Doggo1, because it's like a new dog, is an instance of dog, instance variables, instance methods. So you have class of class, instance, 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 and sort of like that differentiation. Feeling all right about that? That's the biggest thing that I really want you to take away from this lesson. All right. Boop, boop, boop. All right. How are we feeling about like new? And that basically calls initialize. There's nothing sexy about that. That's just what it does. Yeah? All right. Creating instance method. Huh?
You just call it as was.
You cannot. No. It's a thing with Ruby. But yeah, so you can create instance methods easily, like bork or poop, right? All dogs poop. They do that. Talked a little bit about like self. How do you feel about self? It's very abstract. Right? Remember the scope that you're in. That's always going to be really important. This will make more sense as we do practice. We're going to do a lot of self tomorrow and on Thursday, but this is sort of like the intro to self. All right? And then the macros, like the adder reader, the adder writer, and ultimately what it builds for you. It will build straight up the getter and the setter methods, right? Boop. Yes, reader, writer, and accessor are, I think, three of the main built-in macros for like the class. We'll learn more about macros next week, but yeah, for the class, sort of that's kind of like how it is. Yeah.
What would be the reason you would have to use only data or only write?
It's a very good question. I was planning on tackling that after the break, but remember, reader only allows you access to read. Writer only allows you access to write. Accessor gives you both. So you as a developer are trying to model like what makes sense for your application, and that is I should be able to sort of read my username anytime in my app. Should I be able to sort of read my password at any given time? No. So password should be write only, you know? For example, like you're at like a bank, right? And you put in your PIN number. Should you ever display that PIN number? No, but you need to be able to create the PIN number. And at some point when you're like, oh no, like I forgot my PIN number, you have to reset it. You got to call the bank, and it takes 3 days. No, I'm just kidding. But you have to reset your PIN number. They're like, great, put in your new PIN. You're going to write your new PIN number. But at no point do you ever want access to see it. That make sense?
Like CDRs and CDR definitions.
Yeah. All right, cool. That being said, we could take a break. Or we can end it here.
Whatever you want.
Oh, now it's my choice. Okay. Let's do this. Let's take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. I promise there's like 10, 15 minutes left. All right? Let's start the recording. Great. So another real-world example that we can kind of talk about is this idea of like a bank account, right? Everyone kind of has one, or they think that banks are evil and they don't trust them, and all the money goes under the bed. But either way, it's fine. So if I wanted to model this sort of bank account, right? And now we've thought about it, I can do like, whoa. Yes, English not so good. So I have this like bank account, right? And then I need to make it, and it's going to be this like key value pair where I have some sort of like amount, obviously, and it's great. Just buff that up a little bit, right? And then I have like a type. Oops. Whoa, I can't. Right, and it's either like a checking or like a savings. And it takes 3 business days to kind of like transfer, right? Thank you. Wow. Yo, I've been teaching this for a year, and you're the only student that's ever got that joke. All right. Yes, that was, yes, thank you. Wow, 2 students. Wow, plus. 10 points to Gryffindor. Great. So the idea is that like everyone has a bank account. You can create multiple bank accounts. So this is, again, another perfect example, or this idea that we should create a class. So class, bank, okay. Okay. Took longer than I thought it would, but you know, we made it. Right. Remember the camel casing, right? And so when I start anything, I make sure I end, and I drop that little like end bank account, and then a quick mic drop. Exactly. All right. So, this is always a good one. You can drop emojis in like your text editor, which is fantastic. You'll see me do it a lot in your commit messages. I'll say things like "bad boys push to master," and I'll put like the sunglasses emoji. But yeah, if you hold, all right, it's okay. I know you're gonna get your pen out. Control Command Spacebar will open up the emojis. Yeah. Last class I did, we made like a clowns app, so this was very liberally used. Anyways, I'm making this bank account class. First thing I need to do is every single bank account, I have to determine what those attributes are. So a quick DFI, bloop, bloop, bloop. Okay, just kidding. I meant DFI, bloop, bloop, bloop. And then what are sort of like the attributes of this bank account besides amount? Okay, type, great.
Interest.
Wow, you're getting really in the weeds over here. Okay, sure, interest.
Owner.
Interest, oh my God, let's just set this to like 1%. Okay, and then owner, great. Great, cool. Boom, boom, boom. And then we have type. And then we have the interest rate, which we don't need because it's defaulted, smart. And then finally we have the owner. If you want, I can create 2 cursors. Boop. What the? What the? Yep. Ooh. Yeah. That actually you have to download a completely separate thing. And so what you'll learn is, this is what I want to talk about. What you'll learn is you can add a lot of customizations onto your IDE. And that's why we code in IDEs, because it's super helpful. The syntax highlighting, nothing's stopping you from opening WordPad and just jamming out and building a website. Like nothing, like it's just text. But we use text editors because of like the autofill, the syntax highlighting, and a lot of these packages that help you write code really fast. Like if I wanted to make a bunch of bank accounts, right? I think I can just do, right, like bank 1. But then I have to do this like a slob. All right, let's just get rid of that. Actually, you know what? Let's do it. 7, 8. Because I'm Chinese, right? So either way, the point is like we've finished this initialize, and now we need to do what? What should we do now? Test. That's right. We should test our code. Whoever that was, brilliant. Should always be doing that. I know that's like kind of funny. But seriously, like test your code, right? Like everything we do, we should be testing our code. Because nobody is immune to typos, or when they copy paste code, they're like, does this even work? Like, who knows? We should test it. So how can I run this code? That's right, Ruby. And then the file name, which is bank account. Boop, boop, boop. Great. So it ran, that was good, right? There's no errors. Do we have access to bank account? We do. And I know that because if I just put sort of that constant, it exists, versus if I were to say something like, do we make a cat class? No, because they're mean and they scratch you. It kind of like gives you this error, right? I love cats. I don't know why I said that. It's because they scratch you. But I love cats. I just want to be clear. Great. So what else can we do, right? Remember, this bank account is designed to sort of model real life. What is something you want to do in your bank account? Yeah, like put money in there, right? So we can make a method called, right, deposit, right? Okay. You'll see, all right? Once you guys start presenting, you'll be like, man, it's hard to like think, code, and type at the same time. Spelling is the first thing that goes. All right, so deposit. What does deposit do? It adds to the balance. So I'm going to take the amount, and I'm going to add what? Right, like I don't know, right? The idea is that you have to tell it when you deposit, right? Like free money, right? Like whatever money you're throwing in, you're going to add that money. What's sort of like missing about this code? What can I determine? Possibly, maybe when I'm testing, what's going to happen here? Will this increase my amount? No. Why? Smart. Cool. So I can test this, right? Let me just do this. Let me drop the binding pride. Great. Let's make a brand new bank account. So how can I do that? Make a brand new bank account. Great. And so the amount, unfortunately, you know, it's like Monopoly. We'll just start at $200. And then this is our checking account. And then interest rate is, yeah, it's 2.5. Or just 2, it's fine. And then the owner is, who wants to own this bank account? You want to own this? All right, Felix. Smart. All right, great. Let's just get rid of these other bank accounts. Huh?
If there are two owners, we just do comma.
We're gonna get there. All right. That's kind of like where I wanted to like end this lecture. Spoiler alert. But we'll get to it. Don't worry. But yes, if I forget and I end the lecture abruptly, you should be like, wait, pause, and then I'll hook you up, right? So let's kind of test. So I'm in my bank. All right. Okay. And so I run this bank account, and I see bank 1, and I want to know, oh my goodness, how much is in there? Embarrassing. What is this? What is happening here? Huh? Overdrawn? Right. Yes, technically, but more. Yes, exactly. Like I didn't define sort of like this instance method that allows me the getter and the setter. So now we have to do just a tiny bit of thinking and be like, great, let's figure this out. Oops, sorry. You guys like shortcuts? All right, you guys like that reader? RW, wow. W, wow. And then if you put RW, bless up to shortcuts. Wow, powerful. All of these are going to be absolutely worthless next week, but they're very cool now. It's R for read, W for write, and then RW for accessor, because that's what they do. So what is the reader, right? We have, actually, let's do this. Okay, RW. So what should be read and write only? Well, read and write, not only. Amount, great. Should I ever be able to change the type? Can you convert your checking account to a savings account? Yeah, definitely not. Oh, I'm not putting that in there. What about the interest rate? That could definitely change, right? Banks. Okay. Oops. And what about the owner? Can you ever change the owner of the bank account? Right. What she said, which is toward the end of the lecture. Oh my God, you're killing me, Smalls. No, I'm kidding. Let's just leave this alone for now. All right. And then so for read, we have type, and then we have owner. And this will make more sense in a little bit. Okay, great. So now we should test our code, blah, 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 blah. And then we can go into bank 1, Banksy, and then we check the amount. And then we can even try now testing this sort of deposit instance method that we just built. So deposit, and I want to give Felix, Fiddy? Should I just do it, Fiddy? No, I'm just kidding. $1. Congratulations. Actually, you know what? You've passed go. Collect $200. Very good. Yay. So if I take a look at bank 1, dot amount, I see 400, right? Congratulations, you done did it. Now, we are now, again, modeling real life. And so, obviously, deposit is great, but now we have to talk about that weird taboo topic that no one wants to talk about. So you got to pull that money out sometime. And so, we need a withdraw method. Now, withdraw also will need some sort of amount, right? Okay, lose that money, right? So this is just, again, some sort of money, like how much you're withdrawing. And what's happening here? At amount, right, minus sort of equals, and then that money. Let's think about this real quick. All right, you're the bank. Talking about bank 1. Check the amount. Have you ever withdrawn more money than you had? Okay, withdrawn. Withdraw. Wow, that's not a nice number to see in the bank. I'm not going to ask who has seen this number, but what I will ask is this possible?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Some of you are saying yes like you have experience, which makes me worried. It's called what?
Overdrawn.
It's called overdraw, right? Or like a withdrawal. There's a here's the problem with the withdrawal, and that is if you don't have the money, does it give it to you? If you're at an ATM, right, and your checking account reads like $80, you're like, yo, let me sneak out that fat hundo, and you're like, you ask for 100, Does it give you $100 and put negative 20? No, it just goes, yo, listen, I don't know how to put it to you, but like, yo, you don't have the funds for this, right? And then on top of that, they punish you. They're like, oh, you want to pull out $100? You only have 80? I'm going to charge you $3 to tell you no. You don't have the money, which is kind of grimy. Probably revealed too much about my opinion. I will edit that out later. Edit that later. So how can we model this in real life? What sort of is like the logic here? Right. Like if you don't have the money, right? Like if you don't have the money, right? Do not withdraw. Also, -3 doll hairs, right? It's real. They charge you money. They charge you money that you don't have. I put doll hairs, yeah. I'm sorry. I talk like an absolute fool. Dollars. Yeah. There we go. You like that? All right. I'm having a lot of fun. Anyway, so if, right, your amount is what? It's kind of like, what's like the logic here? Okay. Is it this one or is it this one? It's always tricky, right? So now we know at some point we should probably test. But if the amount is less than the money, right, like what you're trying to withdraw. So now you kind of can see like if the amount is less than money, it doesn't read well. So you can probably change that to like withdrawal amount. Sure. So now let's see how this reads. If the amount is less than the withdrawal amount, right? That's like a little, that's mo better, right? Then what do? And unfortunately, amount minus equals $3. And then also it puts you broke. Else, right? If it's good, go ahead and pull that money out. You're Gucci fam, right? Puts, do you want a receipt? Because that's how the ATM works, right? Like, hey, you want me to tell you how much less money you have? I'm like, all right, let's do this. Every time it's a gamble. So that's kind of like the idea behind modeling real life. Now, even extrapolating and taking this sort of to the next step, the idea is like, who here is like really impressed with like the Nest or like the like home automation?
I love that stuff.
Right, it's kind of cool,
Yeah.
right? Kind of.
No.
No? I think it's really cool. But there's nothing stopping you from sort of like building that and sort of like the logic. The idea is that if you're in the Nest, it's like, oh, if the user set the temperature to 75, all you need is like a thermometer that reads the current temperature. So then you can look at current temperature and you can compare it to what the user set it to, and then just turn the AC on until the current temperature reaches 75, and then shut it off. That's just the whole logic. All the world is just lists, loops, and if statements. Every single thing. And so that's why programming is so powerful. And so I kind of want to just demonstrate this, but then take it to the next step and say, what if you had multiple owners in your bank account, which is a question that I thought of entirely on my own, and it's fantastic. Right, great question, right? Great question. No, it's very good. Thank you. I like that you're like thinking, and so that's awesome. So, no, it actually is a really good question, right? This is sort of like the next step. The idea that I want to talk about is sort of relationships between objects. Now, in this sort of example, right, we have bank account, and then how do we initialize the owner? Well, I mean, we're not there yet, but I just mean like, how do we initialize the owner? What is the owner right now, like this data structure, right? I probably should have done this, like zoomed in on like the actual quotes. Yeah, it's a string. We talked about that exact sort of problem with that dog.all, where we did dog.all, we got 3 dog objects. For each one of them, the dog objects have the ability to receive messages. Specifically, they can call those instance methods. They can give you the age, they give you the name, they can bork. They have extra superpowers that's above and beyond just a string. And so what if this wasn't a string, Felix, but now we're thinking, well, Felix also has age, right? Obviously, probably going to heaven, has a breed, right? Has a name, right? Like, what if Felix was not a string, but a owner object? Now this owner object has additional attributes, properties, instance methods that you can now call. And so these are stacking now and becomes very powerful. But like we talked about, what if there's multiple owners? How do we kind of handle that? Right, the idea is that like instead of owner, right, is the owner, owner needs to be like an array somehow. And then what do? Like at owner, and you like shove in like the owner, like, or self, yeah. But then if you shove in self, it's gonna push in every single one, right? So it's probably gonna be like this owner over here. And so you're kind of like, this is kind of tricky. But now we're starting to get into this idea that this bank account can have many owners. And so with that, I think Chet Veer and I are kind of drop a lot of like labs that kind of talk about object-oriented relationships. And that's sort of like the next step for tomorrow. Cool? All right, are there any questions in terms of like creating a class? How are we feeling about that? Okay, all right. And then like instance variables, instance methods, creating instances, right? Class methods, class variables, and then class methods, right? Class methods, class variables. No, there's 3 of them. I'm like totally having a brain fart. Class methods, class variables. Wait, what was it? There's 3. No, there's. I'm like totally embarrassed right now. No. Instance methods, instances, instance variables. Yeah, you're right. Classes. Oh my God. Wow. Classes, class methods, and class variables. You're right. Whoa. You're right. They're kind of like 2 separate domains. All right, and that's all I have for you today. Cool? Awesome.